All right. Andre, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Good. Thanks. Thanks for having me again.
No problem. No problem. It's a lot going on these days. A lot going on specifically in Netherlands as well. Lots of interesting companies in the Netherlands. Lots of AI is kind of taken off over there, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty hectic and vibrant scene over here. Yeah, in various cities and parts of the countries as well. Of course, in Amsterdam, but a lot of things are happening in the south and the north and the east as well. So yeah, it's pretty vibrant.
Nice, nice. So we met a long time ago. It feels like now, and Seemly has kind of been through. You've been around for a long time, got a lot of experience in AI. You've gone through a few kind of like phases, I suppose. So give us a little bit of a lowdown in terms of Seemly today. What does Seemly do for those that don't know?
Yeah, yeah. So I started Seemly about 8.5 years ago as a consultancy firm, and we indeed we transitioned from consultancy into SaaS. And actually, we are fully focused on being a voice enablement platform, that is being used by textual-based software applications to make the step into the voice domain. And with that, we, of course, add STT and TTS solutions to the application, which is an important part, but not the only one, because the most complex part of it is facilitating the telephony infrastructure with telephony lines internationally. How do you reduce latency over different solutions that are being used? And so we help quite a lot of software parties to step into the voice domain.
Interesting. Yeah, it's. I suppose. Well, you tell me if this is true, but voice AI, and I've said this a lot of times over the course of this year so far, because every person we have on here seems to mention voice AI. We've had episodes about it as well, but it seems as though voice AI in 2026 has been, I think 2025 was agentic AI, 2026 is voice AI. Would you concur that the market is kind of, really grabbing hold of voice AI at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, of course, quite some developments that lead to that, not only shortage of personnel, but also technological capabilities. But most of all, the acceptance of consumers as well play a dominant role in that. So indeed, voice AI is one of the biggest steps that will be taken in the next couple of quarters.
And do you focus on kind of like predominantly Netherlands or European kind of companies, or is it US, or where is the most activity coming from?
Most activity is coming from Europe, and we are also fully focusing on using a EU tech stack with that as well, which of course makes us slightly different than let's say other US based players in our domain.
And we'll get into some of the practicalities. I think it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on, taking voice AI to production, because there's a lot of companies that are going through that kind of process at the moment. But one of the things, I suppose, from this month that is pretty pertinent is around the EU AI Act. And, that's kind of coming into force now. There's a lot of kind of new requirements of companies needing to do various different things to comply. Has that either changed or affected either the technology you have or the way in which your kind of clients are approaching voice AI? Is there anything specific about voice AI that kind of falls foul, if you like, to the EU AI Act or not?
I think it makes it's. I think the main step is that it makes companies, let's say, aware of the things that you should comply with, and the main reasons or the main measures that are part of the UI Act, they have already been implemented or have already been existing solutions. So it's more from our perspective on, okay, how should we use this properly, and how should we inform consumers about it as well?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's say you mentioned that you work with a lot of companies that are kind of adding voice into chat. There's a lot of companies who are going through that themselves, not just the vendors that you're kind of referring to, but also brands who've had chatbots for a long time. They maybe they were early adopters around 2015 or so, and the chatbot's been doing really well. They're now starting to progress into the voice channel. What are some of the things that they need to get right when doing that and making that transition from chat to voice?
I think it's really important to reduce the number of knowledge bases that you have in a company or in an organization at all. So if indeed you already have a conversational platform or a chatbot implementation, please reuse that to the maximum extent for your voice applications as well, because otherwise you'll be setting up two different systems, and setting up two different systems isn't the most complex thing, but maintaining it and keeping them up to date is gonna lead to, well, quite some hassle, but also quite differentiated journeys for consumers, because it will lead that the voice to the fact that the voice assistant may probably be giving different answers to the same questions as your digital assistant on a website or in your app will be doing. So reusing that content is I think a really wise decision and wise step to take. And to be honest, from my perspective, also the only scalable solution, scalable approach. But if you move into from text to voice, there are absolutely quite some things that you need to take in consideration. Latency is one of them, and probably the most important one of them as well. Latency, you can look at the latency as actual delays that you're being confronted with in conversations. And if you look at a conversational platform, if you have a conversation with a digital assistant on a website with a chatbot, it doesn't really matter that much if the answers take, let's say, 1 or 2 seconds. However, in an actual voice conversation, a delay of half a second is already really noticeable. So you have to cope with that, and we have all different mechanisms to either speed it up or, secondly, to inform and guide the caller that we need some waiting time. But it's that's one of the most important parts, and latency can be created by various, parts of the chains that are being used. It can be the conversational platform, it can be the STT model, it can be the TTS model, it can be the phone lines that create some latency as well. So it's really good to dive into that and to maximize that, to minimize the latency and maximize the experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll definitely want to get into latency in a bit more detail. Firstly, you mentioned that the thing to do is to kind of, did I understand what you said right, which is use the same content from chat to voice, or were you also saying have the same agent? Were you referring to the back-end content or the actual interaction model that the agent is managing itself?
Both. Where I did say reuse it, but also reuse it as much as possible, because in some cases the answer from a digital assistant on a website may be slightly different than the voice agent will be given. Yeah. So, just to take an example, if somebody submits the question in written form, "Oh, I can't log in. What do I need to do?" Then the digital assistant on the website will say, "Oh, go to this section, click there, do this and do that." Whilst the voice agent will probably give a different answer. Nonetheless, the recognition part of the intent recognition that can be reused for, let's say, 95%. And I just gave an example of a question where the answer can be differentiated based on the channel, but there are numerous answers that you can think of that will be exactly the same regardless of the channel that is being used.
Yeah, I think the thing that we found is that the interaction model itself is different depending on the use case. For example, if you have that example you mentioned of the I forgot my password type of thing, in the kind of chat, it's easy just to say, here's a URL, click here and go to the login page and click this. Whereas in the voice channel, you can't just read the URL, so you've got to find a way of getting the URL to them type of thing. And then, for example, if you're going to do like a step-by-step kind of, okay, first reset your password, then come back and do this, and then do that, and then do the other. In chat, you can kind of get away with having all of that just printed on the screen because the user's got a lot of time. They can go back to the top of the paragraph and reread it again. Whereas in voice, it's a lot more sort of like, one message at a time. First do this. Okay, if you've done that, then do that. Okay, now you've done that. So
absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of companies that get themselves into a bit of a trap, which is stick a voice on top of your chatbot, but actually the interaction model sometimes is different on voice.
Yeah, absolutely. For a chat-based conversation, a user can reread, can skip parts of the sentences, can go back to the beginning of a paragraph. In voice, you can't. You need to be aware of the fact that in voice, the user needs to pay full attention to understanding what you're trying to bring across. But you also need to consider that people that call tend to be doing different things at that same time as well. Yeah. Whatever, doing something with the dishwasher or cleaning a desk or whatever. So there's a mismatch in what you expect what the caller is doing, and also what the caller is doing, what the caller will be doing or may be doing as well. I do want to get back to one point. You said something about you can't share URLs in a voice application.
I think maybe I'll clarify. You can, but you don't want to read a URL on a voice channel basically because someone's not going to listen to it or understand it or whatever,
Yeah, I think to be honest, I fully agree with you if you're using the actual URL, saying domain/world.zoom/j/1874, etc. You can't do that, of course. There are, however, some approaches that you can use. For instance, the majority of your callers will be calling with mobile phones. You can use text messages as a medium to bring across a complex URL. Secondly, what we also advise in our implementations is see if you can rewrite those URLs. And then also inform the caller that you will be sharing a URL, saying, okay, I'm gonna share a URL with you, which is news.com/help-me, as an example. And don't forget to repeat it as well. So that is news.com/help-me. So those are, two of the approaches that you that implementations are using to indeed do something with URLs.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think short URLs, a memorable short one, is a good idea. Also, the good thing about voice, although it has its limitations in terms of the audio channel and the transient nature of the interface, you tend to have people don't think you've got time on the voice channel, but you kind of do, because when someone's on the phone, they're on the phone. It's not like they're kind of like running to catch a bus and they've got like a split second and you've got to get it done there and then. It's kind of like you do have more time than you think. So you could even say, I'm going to read you a URL. Are you calling from a mobile phone? Or even if you know the phone number, you know they're calling from a mobile phone. So, put this on loudspeaker and go to your web browser. And when you're ready, I'll read you the URL.
Exactly.
So you can even walk them through it. So even if the URL is a little bit kind of like longer, at least you can get them onto the browser so you know what context they're in. You know they're ready to receive it and they're going to type it as you read it type of thing. So there's things like that are different about voice, which I think actually is in its benefit. If that makes sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think if as long as you keep on adding value in a conversation, the callers are okay with longer conversations as long as every part of that conversation also comes across as a relevant part of it. And from the other side, there are you have to be as compact as possible in the voice domain, where digital assistants, text-based digital assistants may sometimes be quite elaborate in, I can imagine that it's really that this is really inconvenient for you. Let me try to help you out. So to get this all sorted, blah blah. Sometimes in a phone conversation, you want to reduce those, let's say, emotional aspects and just focus slightly more on saying, "I'm going to help you with that."
Yeah, I think I always say that voice AI is pure conversation design, and chatbot design is lazy conversation design, because you can get away with so much sloppiness on the chat channel that people, I don't think, really appreciate that there is an art and a science to making great conversations, because you can get away with it on the chat channel. There's so many chatbots I've seen and AI agents I've seen. When you ask it a question, it could be an ambiguous question that's not exactly clear. And if I was to ask you the question, you'd be like, "What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?" And you would make sure that you understand it before you answer. Whereas a lot of AI agents will just take whatever the customer said and they will go and try and answer the question regardless. And that question will be answered across 6 turns, like 6 chat bubbles. And then you've got to scroll back up past the kind of like top of the chat bar to the chat widget to actually go to the top of the answer. And just as long as the answer's in there somewhere, you can get away with it, even though it's a terrible experience. But the people building it don't really think about it. They think, the answer's in there, so we've answered it. So you can get away with a lot in chat. And I don't think you just cannot get away with it on the voice channel, because it's just a totally different beast.
Yeah, and I think in chat, the digital assistants in chats they can guide the user more in the conversation if you're using... for instance, options that you're showing, what can I help you with? You show a list of options. And if you look at how the same question is being asked on voice and what kind of input you may receive on voice, the input you receive on voice is far more will surprise you far more than a click on a predefined button. Also, in voice, people may jump from one part to the other one. So they may be checking or trying to check where their package is, but in that same process say, "Oh, by the way, can you also take something back from me that I got here that I need to return?" So taking turns in conversations which are really unexpected. Or in voice, callers may be even correcting themselves, saying, no, sorry, I just said that I prefer tomorrow, but please make that the day after tomorrow. And even that example, referring to dates, not as in specific dates, but in tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or next week, Wednesday, it's far more natural. But it makes it harder. You have to close that gap. Whilst in chat-based conversations, you can use date pickers to make sure that you receive the input as you really would like to receive it.
Yeah, you've got a lot of guardrails, haven't you, in the chat channel? You can fall on a lot of UI components to mask the difficulty of language. But I think you're right. You're right in terms of the voice. In terms of like people on a phone call start talking before they've even figured out what they want to say. Yeah. Have you noticed that? So they'll start. How can I help you? Oh well, I was on the train and for whatever reason I've left my bag and now I've gone to make a transfer to my friend and actually my card's in my bag. And it's like, they want to say I've lost my bank card, but they on a chat channel, they've got the time to think about, what do I want to say? Oh, I've lost my bank card. But on the voice channel, because it's immediate and it's real time, you're under a bit of pressure to say something. People start talking before they've figured out what it is they want to say. So you deal with a lot more complex language.
But also speaking is easier than typing. So indeed, your example, people just start talking, saying quite some irrelevant things as well, just to say, oh, I lost my bank card, whilst on a digital assistant on web, if the question would be, what can I help you with? People will say, well, okay, I'm not going to type that I was on a train and I was traveling to a friend, because that's too much hassle. I'm just going to focus on lost my bank card. So I think it's, if you look at it as a let's say, dance, in a chatbot-based conversation, the digital assistant leads the conversation. In a voice domain, the voice assistant follows the conversation, because the caller is far more in control than and can give far more unexpected input than on web-based conversations.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's a moment when the assistant takes control again, but I think what generative AI allows you to do, what chatbots forced you to do with NLU, is they forced you to basically take over ownership of the conversation as fast as possible, because you had to match an intent. So that intent was lost bank card. As soon as you know that the customer it's about a lost bank card, you can grab that, put them into the journey, and then you control what questions come and you control what information you're asking for and all that stuff. With generative AI, and I don't think this is necessarily specific to voice, but I think your observation of it's easier to talk than it is to type is probably the thing that causes it to happen more often on voice, which is that I've lost my train of thought now. What was I saying there? Oh, yeah. What was I saying there? I've completely gone blank.
That on Gen AI, because you said...
that it's ownership. Ownership. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I've completely blanked out there. It's ownership. Yeah, so with Gen AI, because you're not fitting things into buckets and boxes, and it's up to the user to use their own language, you're in a bit of it's that dance at the beginning, which is essentially a whole series of disambiguation, because the user can ask this, then ask that, then ask this, then ask that, and turn here and turn there, and ramble and ramble and ramble. But still, when you know that now I know that it's about the lost bank card because I've got there, you can then go into that more sort of like, I'll take control of the conversation because I need certain bits of information from you. So I don't know if I think it's more prevalent on voice because of the nature of people just speaking rather than typing. But also I think it's because of generative AI allows the conversations to start really, really broad and then be sort of whittled down, whereas NLU forced conversations to be as narrow as possible immediately, as fast as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you see as well in the Gen AI world, with a pretty big for a really big software company that we're working with now, is that the Gen AI answers that they're creating, they can be corrected during the fact that they're being presented as well. And that is pretty okay, or you can deal with it if you're having a text-based conversation, because you can just then delete and then retype it. But in a voice bot conversation, it's you have to deal with that on a different manner. And if you look at Gen AI in general, it's good it can be okay, and it can be really good to use it in voice implementations. However, you really have to pay attention into how much time is it taking. And 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 seconds is okay. But if each answer takes, let's say, 30 seconds, then you just can't use that approach in a voice domain for each part of that voice conversation.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The importance of latency, which you kind of touched on earlier before we got into the kind of like differences between voice and chat, etc. You're right. I think that generative AI causes a lot of latency. You mentioned a few other things earlier on that cause a lot of latency: the speech recognition, the speech generation. You've got the voice bit in the middle. If you're doing anything in terms of like chaining prompts together or whatever it might be, the platform itself. There's a load of things in there that cause a lot of latency. Let's begin with what is in your experience if you were to pick out one thing that has the biggest impact on latency in voice AI, what do you think that would be?
The biggest impact is not as much on the systems, but as more on guiding the user. Because if you're if we know that creating an answer takes, let's say, 5 seconds, it can start creating the answer, but and of course, we can make sure that the user is being informed with, oh, give me a second because I'm working on an answer. But you can also make sure that you start replying to the caller, saying, oh, thanks for that answer, thanks for that question. Let me work on that for a second. And that sentence already, let's say, can cover 2.5 seconds. Yeah. It's really good to look at latency from different perspectives, not only process-wise, where is it being created and how can we minimize it, but also from a user perspective, how can we guide the caller into accepting the latency that we have to deal with as well. And the main parts of latency currently, generally speaking, are being created by the conversational platform itself. STT and TTS, they've become really rapidly, generally speaking, of course, depending on the model that you're using. But that same goes for the conversational platforms. They can be working with different models where one is faster than the other one as well. And I think we have to be aware of the fact, or we have to challenge ourselves in also different parts of the conversation. Where do we accept latency? Because if you want to know where your package is, it's okay at the end of that journey where you've submitted all your data. If you then have to wait, let's say 4 or 5 seconds, that's far more acceptable than if you have to wait each time 4 seconds. What's your postal code? Submitted the postal code. And wait 5 seconds for, hey, what's your house number? So then you also, I think you have to be, you have to challenge yourself and your team into how can we reduce that latency, and what kind of model are we using for that? And maybe sometimes even move away from AI for specific parts, to make sure that specific parts of our conversations can be dealt with far more rapidly.
Is there anything? Am I hearing? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my kind of like what I'm taking from this is that basically latency is a little bit like a hallucination, which is that you're not necessarily ever going to get rid of it. It's just something you're going to have to live with, and therefore it becomes about when it is inevitable, how do you manage it best? Is that fair or not?
I think so, absolutely. Latency will always be there. And if your latency is bigger than, let's say, 1.5 seconds, it already becomes pretty inaccessible or pretty unacceptable. But there are different researchers that have said that different cultures are expecting different speeds and that are accepting different levels of latency as well. But you just have to make sure that you that you make it as acceptable as possible.
Mm.
And compare it to, let's say, a website. That has latency as well. It needs to load. And if you're on a website carrying out, let's say, where's my package journey, then we all accept the fact that, yeah, of course, APIs need to be consulted. If the consulted, yeah, that takes a couple of seconds. And I think that will be in the voice domain as well. There will always be latency. However, make sure to reduce it as much as possible and guide the caller as much as possible. And also make sure don't accept latency everywhere in the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like, when we used to do all of the Alexa skill design work, it was all around earcons, and we'd use earcons in places where there was going to be latency, which is essentially like an audible noise, like the audio version of an icon. So it's almost like the audible version of the loading wheel. You press pay, and there's a loading wheel that spins up while the payment API is working. So you need like an audio version of that, which doesn't have to be a noise or a sound or a cha-ching or anything like that. It can just be exactly as you said, or hold on a minute while I just look that up for you. And by the time you've said that, you've probably made the API call and it's done,
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're, so latency can indeed be, sometimes can be looked at from different perspectives as well. From, how much time does the process take? But also the second part can also be how fast does the caller get an answer? And indeed, if you already start the answer with, oh, thanks for submitting all that info, let me look that up for you, that answer can be shared within, let's say, half a second. So the perceived latency can then indeed be half a second, whilst the API may take 3.5 seconds, as an example, to actually share or process the data and get back with the correct answer.
And I suppose if you can close that gap and you can mask the API call with dialogue, from the user's perspective, there isn't any latency.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's quite interesting. That What can you do?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. Yeah, I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, so that's so in the area of latency, it's I think always good to additionally check with what do you consider latency? Is that based from, let's say, looking at systems and applications, or is it from the user perspective? And those two things may differ, absolutely.
And from your side, from Simili's side, what are the levers that you can pull to try and affect latency? Because I suppose if I understand this correctly, you're kind of like in the middle of it all, orchestrating everything needed to happen on the voice channel. So you've got the text-to-speech, the ASR, the platform. You've got all that kind of stuff to sit in and around. Is there anything in particular that you advise or that you can do within your control to help manage latency? Or is it a lot of choosing the best model, choosing the best kind of like ASR, helping the clients with like masking the latency and stuff like that? Like, what is it specifically that you can, what levers do you have to pull, so to speak?
The main thing that we do in that aspect is making it transparent what the latency actually is. And secondly, on where and how it's being created, in which application it's being created. And that's, I think, three levels better than what, let's say, other providers do. They'll just say, oh, yeah, I made a voice connection. It worked well. We did a good job. But one skill up, it's also not only making sure to show, oh yeah, we made a connection, but actually we arranged a conversation. How did that conversation go? How fast were we all in that conversation? And then lastly, not only saying, okay, how fast were we as a total, but also how fast was each component per part of the conversation, just to make sure that we all have the right data that we're all looking at, to make sure that we talk about the optimizations in each individual part. Because indeed, let's say maybe switching from STT model from model A to B may create or reduce the latency with, let's say, 0.1 second or maybe even 0.2. But we've seen examples that creating an answer from a chatbot perspective creates, let's say, latency of 15 seconds. So I'm not saying that you should not look at optimizations from, let's say, for 1.0 second, but I think you should always look at the optimizations from a broad perspective to consider, are we optimizing the right part? Or are we now micro optimizing it whilst neglecting bigger potential optimizations?
Yeah, that's a very good point, that, because I think that that's where most people think about latency is, well, I've got my chatbot and therefore the voice line, the phone line is going to add latency, and the TTS and ASR is going to add latency. But actually, I don't think they ever think about it's the thing they've built in the first place that's going to be the main culprit. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot kind of a lot of interest in voice AI as well in terms of future facing potential when it comes to being able to do things that, it's always been on the radar with chatbots and stuff like that, but it's never really been possible, or everyone's been focusing so much on just getting the thing to work that all this stuff just kind of falls by the wayside. So, for example, I don't know, things like sentiment, recognizing that the sentiment of the user is negative and they're having a really terrible time, and then therefore, do you treat that conversation any differently? Do you fast track them to a human, or do you do something different in terms of your tone? Is there a way in which you can almost mold the interaction around the context of the user based on the fact that on the voice channel, we've got access to a lot richer data than we do on text, because text is just characters and voice is the whole voice. So are there any things that are kind of emerging in this space that you've got your eye on that you think, we're watching this, because if this actually makes it to production, then it could change things?
Yeah. So a couple of things indeed. So sentiment and emotion detection and sentiment analysis is one of them. Where we're specifically looking at, okay, how could that also influence the part of the conversation, or maybe even how answers are being given? It could depend on different companies in how you actually deal with somebody that shares his negative sentiments. Indeed, maybe fast track them to an agent, but why? But it's a company decision if you really want to do that. Because why do people that have shared less negative sentiments, why do they have to wait longer then? But that's more, let's say, that's fully flexible for companies to choose how they will be coping with that. Multimodality is another thing that's really interesting. You just shared at the start of this conversation the example where voice maybe also guides the user in, okay, I'm going to help you to go through this process on the website. Do this. Did you get to do that? Okay, now I'm going to take you to the next step. So that's one part of multimodality. But another part could also be if I'm calling my utilities company and I need to, or I want to share a picture, or I'm calling my internet provider to say that my modem doesn't work, and the voice assistant ask me, what kind of modem do you have? I don't know the brand, I don't know the type, but it would be, sometimes I am able to share a picture, for instance. So those kinds of multimodality are something indeed that, I think that's going to create richer experiences as well. And Well, also in the part of multimodality, or in that same area, we just talked about that people can talk faster than they type, but people can read faster, and then they can listen as well. So maybe maybe there is a foreseeable future that if I'm talking to a voice agent on the phone, that my phone also will be presenting that conversation to me in actual text as well. Which is of course also part of multimodality. So those are the some of the examples. I think lastly, something that technically already can be done, but it's not as much. It's not used as much because I don't think it's not as advanced as we expected. It would be, how can we differentiate the answers for, well, let's say 2 different colors? If I'm asking a question to a bank on what kind of mortgage did you have, I expect maybe a different answer than if you're asking the same question, because you have different interests, and I have. I think that other things are more important in a mortgage. So maybe one of us wants a really short, compact, factual answer saying it's 3%, whatever percentage for whatever number of years, whilst the other maybe wants an answer saying, okay, but I'm going to tell you what we're going to do with the money that we make out of your mortgage because we spend it wisely, etc. And the percentage is only an outcome of that answer. So I think those technically that's something that could be working already. It's still something that has quite some potential, I think, because in an actual human-to-human conversation, the advisor will probably ask, okay, what do you think that is important in a mortgage? And then make his or her total answer a part of that flow rather than just, aiming or sharing the percentages. For another consumer, it indeed that can be the approach. But different consumers can expect different answers.
Yeah, I think there's other things related to that, which kind of like I wonder whether now that generative AI is kind of matured, whether this sort of stuff becomes a lot easier. Which is that, whenever someone calls the contact center, they're calling from a phone number, so you can always access the phone number. And what most companies, when they build a chatbot, the way they approach it is a chatbot is opened from any page on the website, and it begins with, "Hi, how can I help?" It doesn't have access to any of your browsing history, doesn't see what you've been searching for recently, doesn't see what page you're on, so it lacks all of the context that would make that conversation actually useful. "Hey, Kane, I've noticed that you've been browsing TVs for the last 25 minutes. Looks like you've been looking at the same view a few times. Is there anything specific that I can help you with regarding that?" That's a far better interaction than, "Hey, how can I help?" and letting me do the hard work of describing to you what I've just been doing for the last 10 minutes. So things around on the voice channel, stuff like getting the phone number, and what used to be a bit of a nightmare is going to look up the customer record and trying to see if there's anything there that would inform the interaction. And all of that is a lot of code, a lot of integrations, whereas these days, with generative AI being so powerful, you could essentially just grab the phone number. Once you've validated the customer is who they say they are, go to the CRM, pull back everything you can about the customer, and you essentially have an agent that just goes through that and says, right, is there any contact that's been here recently? If they've got any open tickets, if they called us in the last 3 days, and then use all of that to then guide what the interaction looks like. So it's all this stuff that all this is, I think, entirely possible now. It's not an emerging property of AI that's going to change the world. It's more about the biggest limiting factor, which has always been the case, I think, is that businesses are not thinking about that. They just want to get things stood up and working, and they're not really thinking about how do we make this absolutely great,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think reusing the data that you already have available in other systems or in other interaction is a really wise thing to do. Because if you know that I've submitted a ticket, let's say 2 days ago, and uh, yesterday I added a comment to it saying, okay, do you already have a response? If I then called that specific company, it would be, well, awesome if I as a person would be recognized, and maybe also it recognizes the fact that in what kind of flow I am. So why not have the voice assistant say, "Hey, Andre, do you happen to be calling about the ticket that you're submitting, or is there something else?" But also, instead of treating me as an unrecognized, unvaluable number, make me feel appreciated and recognized.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. I think the one thing is absolutely certain, which is that voice AI for me is still, it's the most exciting channel. It's the kind of the most challenging, I suppose, as well, but it's the one where you can create, I think, the best experiences. I think generative AI has really sort of helped, expedite a lot of the interest on it. But ever since, you said you started the company 8 years or so ago, it's about the same time that I started VUX. And at the time, it was all about, voice is going to change the world. It's going to be the most, efficient, best kind of format for interacting with AI. And we went through a few little rounds of like here and there. It was kind of like voice assistants were popular, then they weren't, then chatbots were popular, then it wasn't. But I think now finally the technology seems to have matured quite a lot. The market has matured quite a lot. You mentioned at the beginning that user acceptance has kind of come on a great deal. So it seems to me as though like now is, I think that the technology and everything about the voice channel now is just ready. There's nothing stopping it now from being a really, really positive, impactful channel, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think consumers are, as long as you add value to the conversations, consumers are really happy with that. So don't use it to keep callers away from your agents, but make them a valuable part of that conversation, and make sure that indeed, if necessary, you can still get in touch with an actual colleague, but all the data is being transferred seamlessly as well, so you don't have to repeat yourself. But I almost took that for granted, to be honest. But here and there are some implementations still where even I experienced that the other day with a pretty big company. The voice assistant asked me for my postal code, even my name. So then I shared my name, and of course it's Endre, which is not a really common name in Holland. But then the voice assistant said, what he called me again, it really differently. He said, so thanks to Dwight or something. So I was from Andre, I turned into Dwight, but I also shared my postal code, I think 2 or 3 times. And then I was transferred to an agent. And then the agent asked me again, but what is your postal code? And I said, why do I need to reshare it? Because I shared it already 2 or 3 times, and that agent even said to me, "Oh yeah, that was with our voice assistant, right? That doesn't work at all."
Oh, God.
Yeah. So make sure, but it make sure that your voice assistant adds value to the conversation, and not set it live and don't look after it anymore, which is probably something that happened in that experience, in this example. Another example for a really big insurance company with a pretty old user group, the voice assistant that we developed only prepared the live conversations that were taking place after the voice assistant. And the insurance company wasn't sure if their audience would accept it. So we actually asked that question to the callers, saying, "Hey, I'm a voice assistant. I am planning to to ask you a couple of questions so I can share that data with the actual colleague. Are you okay with that? And over 70% said, oh, sure, no problem at all. So that also is a sign, I think, that as long as you add value, people are okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Couldn't have said it better. That's brilliant. Endre, this has been absolutely fantastic. Really, really appreciate your time, my friend. It's been really, really interesting. I think there's a lot of learnings in there, a lot of lessons for people. We'll put the Seamly website in the show notes, seamly.ai, isn't it? SEAMLY.ai for those of you who are listening to this in audio form. And really appreciate it. It's been really good.
Thanks. See you. And I think we see each other at one of the events in the next couple of weeks in Holland.
That's
so
right.
Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, there's a conversational AI conference in Utrecht, which is run by Frank Watching. So if you are over, in fact, even if you're in the UK, it's literally an hour away. So we'll put the links to that as well in the show notes. And looking forward to seeing you there, my friend.
Yeah.
Nice one. All right.
See you there, man.
Thanks very much. Thanks all for listening.
Bye-bye.
And we'll see you again on the next one. Thanks now. Bye.